Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to have a guest on our show today, Dr. Nasha Winters. Now, I will share publicly that I've personally consulted with Dr. Winters. She's brilliant. She's a genius. I love the work that she's doing. She's a board certified naturopathic, or she is a fellow of the American Board of Naturopathic Oncology. She's a certified naturopathic doctor. She's also a licensed acupuncturist. She's the founder and CEO and visionary of Optimal Terrain Consulting. She's written an amazing book called The Metabolic Approach to Cancer, which I've personally read. Do you have a copy by any chance, Andy? There you go. That's beautiful. I have mine. I have it on Kindle. So no, it's great, great book. And she lectures all over the world. She teaches doctors about immune modulation through mistletoe, hyperthermia, and the ketogenic diet. So welcome, Nasha. I'm so excited to have you here.
Oh my gosh, Dr. V, it is such an honor. As I told you before you started rolling, you're a big deal. And it's an absolute honor to be with you and all of your amazing listeners. You support so many.
Well, thanks. So we're going to have some interesting conversation today, and I'm really excited about our podcast today because your life story basically is a witness to the work that you're doing. I mean, you're living proof. I'm living proof. So many others are living proof that when we change our terrain and we keep it in balance, then we can continue to live our life being vibrantly healthy. So if you don't mind, share your story with our listeners so they'll have a little bit of background about you and your health issues.
Sure. Well, my mom would probably tell you I kind of came into the world not at the healthiest. I spent a lot of my early years very, very colicky. Of course, at the time when I was born in 1971, it was out of favor to breastfeed. So they started with formulas, which I was allergic to all of them. And the one they settled on was soy, which I still didn't tolerate, but it was the less of the two evils. Probably explains why I started menstruating at 9 back in 1980, which we didn't see things like that then. Didn't really capture anybody's attention. Really blew out my thyroid before it even got up and running into my menstruating years. So giving you that little foundation that I had kind of a shaky start with my microbiome, my immune system, my hormones from the get-go. It's not surprising that when I was 14, I had a brush with cervical cancer. At 16, another, and they just were like, just keep freeze dried and cutting it out. That's the answer. And by the time I was 19 and in and out of the hospital, or not a hospital, but an ER once, twice a month, and excruciating pain, very, very sick, throwing up, all kinds of issues where they just kind of blamed me as being kind of a hypochondriac and a histrionic as going into my second year of college. It took them all by surprise when I showed up in the ER with my belly enormously bloated, unbelievably distended, completely stick figure arms and legs, in stage organ failure, and massive amounts of ascites fluid built up when someone finally thought they'd actually run the proper tests that they ignored running for over a year. And at that time, when I was officially diagnosed, I was actually 2 weeks into my 20th year on this planet, but I've been dealing with issues for a whole year prior to that. So this is October 21st in 2001 when they gave me the news that I was stage 4 terminal ovarian cancer, mets to my liver, peritoneal cavity, carcinomatosis, malignant ascites, a grapefruit-sized tumor on my right ovary. Wow. And because I was in end-stage organ failure and because I was so sick, just simply at that time MRI is what I had available to me. The scan itself put me into kidney failure. So they couldn't even die from the scan. They basically cut me loose and said, you're going, let's get you into palliative care. Hospice wasn't really up and running in this small town at that time. So given less than a few months to live and not being told that treatment was an option for me because of my state of health or lack thereof, I was left to my own devices. And I don't know if it's my wholesome growing up in the plains upbringing. I don't know if it was because I also came from a place that I had to learn to survive in a pretty significant way. So I think that instinct had kept me alive for the 19 years prior to that and really kicked in high gear. I don't know if it was some of my genetics, like my my homozygous MAO for my warrior gene that finally carried me along, that basically said, you can tell me a lot of things, but you can't tell me my life is over yet. So that has become a almost 27-year journey into learning about my body and about the process of cancer and about the terrain, as I like to call it, and that of tens of thousands of other people that I have had the pleasure and joy and honor of working with, that we're all kind of life learners and living experimental labs on our own every day, that brings you and I here together today and talking about this.
Wow. So no surgery, no interventions.
And just biopsies, some I had the ascites fluid drained multiple times because it kept filling up because my albumin were so low at that time. And over a matter of several weeks, several months, they were doing that for palliative supportive care only, and pulled almost 9 liters of fluid out of my abdomen over time. That's not fun.
That's incredible.
No, it was, I think back now, and you guys have to remember 27 years ago, there was no Dr. Google. I was in a very small town in Colorado. We had one oncology center. We had one ER. We had, it wasn't very sophisticated, and I wasn't sophisticated. I didn't have insurance. Even though I was pre-med, I wasn't thinking in terms. I was still very mechanistic in my model of thinking about medicine. I never thought about the whole equation of the body and the being wrapped around the disease. So that was a new territory for me. And so I wish I didn't even have, there was no digital camera. It was nothing. I wish I'd had the wherewithal to take photos and whatnot of that time. We weren't thinking of that. I was fighting for my life, and I was expecting to be gone within a few months. And so when I wasn't, and then I wasn't, and then I wasn't for weeks and months and then years and then decades, it's sort of like every time I'm sort of shocked over the years, especially the first probably 5 or 6 years, it was very, very, very touch and go. And I did not want to share my experience. I had really a handful of people in my life that knew what was going on with me. And part of me making that decision not to go that conventional method approach was because, first of all, I was told it wasn't going to work for me and I couldn't do it. It would take my life faster. So that kind of scared me off. Second of all, I thought, if I'm going to go out, I want to understand why this happened. And third of all, I had a partner, my now husband, had watched his brother, who had stage 4 pancreatic cancer, who was given 3 months to live, who, as my husband always tells the story, Bob was given 3 months to live and he gave him the finger, and he ended up down in Mexico. And this is, oh my gosh, my husband was 16, I think, and he's going to be 50 this year. So that kind of gives you a time frame. Again, there was no Dr. Google. My brother-in-law lived with the mass intact in a very aggressive pancreatic tumor that seemed to stop in its tracks after going to Mexico. Some of the clinics, he went to several, some of them don't exist anymore, and some of them have taken on new personalities over the years. But my brother-in-law lived another 24 years, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, that until the last few months of his life did not cause him any bother.
That's amazing. Amazing.
Right? I think having a partner who witnessed that could support me in my process to know that all is possible.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that. There's so much pressure on people who've been diagnosed with cancer. And I know the women in our tribe, in our community, they want to reach that goal of quote unquote cancer free, right? We hear that all the time. And I really think it's a misnomer, and it's not helping women to understand that that's not, yes, we want to be virally healthy, but is cancer free really something that is attainable? And how can we shift that understanding by the things that we do with your program, for example, with the 10 terrain? How can we shift that and know that it's somebody can live 20 plus years or longer with a tumor in their body, and they're not, what you use the term, cancering or producing active cancer?
First of all, I love that question, because my question sort of back just under the table in general is, isn't it interesting that we equate cancer-free as healthy? And, I always explain to my clients when I start working with them that a lot of people, every patient I really can think of says, I was healthy until I was diagnosed with cancer. And in the work I've done for myself and in all the folks I've worked with, and what I talk about in the book, is frankly, that's an impossibility. You did not go to bed one night and wake up with a tumor. This took decades, at least 7 to 10 years per the research, but possibly decades. And as you alluded to, we all have cancer cells all the time. It's the signaling and the communication wrapped around those cells that promote health or promote disease, which means we get to sit at the command center. We get to drive the car down the road, if you will, and we get to keep exploring every nook and cranny and making sure we're not ignoring anything. So when I have had patients who've gone the route of maybe completely conventional and done everything right and come see me, or patients who've even said, I'm never doing anything conventional and they're coming to see me, well, I'm not so worried about the treatment. In fact, that's where I do not put much energy on the treatment. I don't treat cancer. I don't treat tumors. I don't use treatments. I help people understand how they got here and why, and help them draw a little map of how to get out of it, basically, and change the course of the direction of their lives. And I think that that's where the conversation starts to really change, and that I even hate to be called, in fact, I refuse to be called a cancer survivor, because that somehow seems like, I don't know, adversarial a little bit, but also that I somehow am done with it, right? So I call myself a cancer thriver. Or just a thriver, really. I'm not a cancer, I'm just a thriver. and that it's an ongoing dynamic process. And I can tell when my body is off. I can tell, when I'm not taking as good of care of myself as I should. I've gotten very hypersensitive to the signals of my body. But most people, when I first meet them, they don't have those signals. Or they're there, but as one of my patients say, I love her analogy, says, it's like I just put a piece of tape over the check engine light on my dashboard of my car. Isn't that perfect?
That's perfect.
These humans, right? We're just like, oh, that little ache or that little digestion or that little thought process, I'll just put a little piece of tape over that and carry on until it's, a broken down, smoking jalopy on the side of the road. That's often when we finally see someone for healthcare, or disease care, I should say, in the method that we have in the world today. And so my hope is that, and your listeners know that I'm also very much not against a conventional intervention. I just think today we've come so far that had I been diagnosed today, I would maybe do things very differently because of the tools I have to really test, assess, and address my every step in a very precise way. So for example, I had that process going on. I should have, with my family history. Now, back then, we didn't know about BRCA. We didn't know that all these grandmas and aunts and were dying of they're just like just some weird bowel death. Like no one knew it was ovarian cancer or breast. Like they didn't have that information a few generations back.
Right.
But today it's like I would have started screening young with vaginal ultrasounds. I would have got an annual CA-125 and HE4. I would have been looking at my terrain a lot more closely. What we now know about BRCA, I would have been starting to clean up my environment much more. I would have helped my methylation processes and helped my body take out the garbage instead of accumulating it, which I have a tendency to do with my epigenetics. I would have changed a lot of my relationships in work, in romance, in friendships, in experiences that were not serving me. I would have maybe dealt with some of my trauma and abuse more head on, with some courage, thanks to things like Me Too movements and things like that today. Maybe we are given more opportunity to deal with some of those transgressions against our bodies at young ages. And so we have such a different way about it today that maybe I would have done differently with a surgical intervention or even a precision tested chemotherapy option or hyperthermia, which, now, if something ever happened again, I would likely go to Germany and do hyperthermia because of what I've learned about its use for ovarian cancer very particularly. So I'm just giving examples that back then doing nothing was far safer than doing everything.
That's right.
And today we have a lot more opportunity to get very, very specific and very precise to help our patients wherever they are.
Excellent. So I've created a system called the 7 Essential System. And I created that because as I went through my healing journey, I felt confusion and frustration and, taking bits and pieces of information here and there. And I wanted to simplify it so women could have a step-by-step guide as to, what they needed to do from A to Z when they were either wanting to, prevent cancer or heal breast cancer.
Beautiful.
Now, you've created a similar process. You call it the 10 terrain. Now, could you briefly kind of touch on each one and go through the 10 terrain?
Sure. And as I said a moment ago, I mean, first of all, I love your program. I think it's incredibly helpful. And it's sort of like, this is where you start. You kind of hand over your guide to someone. But for me, a lot of people are coming to me. I mean, the majority of the patients that still look for somebody like me to consult with them have already had their diagnoses, had their treatments, had their recurrences, had their progressions, they've been at this rodeo for a while. So I'm usually a little later to the game in their situation. So they're just saying now, hey, I've had 2 or 3 recurrences. I want to understand why now. I did standard of care, and yet here I am again. And so that's the majority. Now, luckily, I'm getting a wave of early adopters to this concept of prevention, but still, we are still predominantly the other way. So when I talk about the terrain 10, these are sort of the 10 main patterns that I personally, over my own health history, as well as that of tens of thousands of patients I've had the opportunity to work with, have seen these kind of 10 common patterns that basically fill up our bucket. So these kind of 10 situations that kind of fill our bucket, and that bucket I liken to the mitochondria. And the mitochondria are the engine of our body. This is what drives us down the road. This is where all of our ability to even get out of bed in the morning, to rest and digest, everything comes down to whether those little powerhouses are doing their job. Do we have enough energy to get through our day? So those little guys take a beating just day by day by day. But when everything's in balance, they repair well, they multiply well, they, can still just kind of take care of themselves. But the burden gets big in the world today. You just can't avoid it anywhere on the planet. So that bucket can get filled up with things that make those mitochondria weaker and less in number and less efficient and less effective, therefore making our energy status way less effective. And so those 10 things include things like your epigenetics. So what was handed down from you for previous generations. It's maybe the deck of cards you were dealt, but you can play the card individually. You can play out a whole different hand every time. Then we have things like our sugar, our metabolism. This is huge. That is the primary fuel source into our cells, is what we choose to put into our body at any given time. And so being metabolically inflexible and living on a high standard American diet, high sugar, high processed food diet is very detrimental to that bucket, to that mitochondria. No matter how you slice it, that's what we know to be true today. Third things would be things like your toxicant exposures. My colleague and friend, Dr. Walter Crinnion, says it best when he says it's not a matter of if you have toxicity, it's how much toxicity. Unfortunate, but true. Number 4, we look at things like your microbiome. Remember, I mean, as you've been at this long enough, Dr. B, everyone used to kind of laugh at naturopaths when they thought we were kind of poop-centric or all about the gut. Even Hippocrates said, disease begins in the gut. We have kind of poo-pooed that in Western medicine, pun intended, that now we are finally coming around, and guess what? That's where our billions of research dollars are going, is into microbiome, because we now know that this is the source of a lot of our neuroendocrine function, our hormonal function, obviously our immune function is key. And then that segues into our immune system. So how is our immune system? Did we start the world off where we were like immediately loaded up with, with the Hep C vaccine as soon as you popped out, because you're of course going to run out and have sex and shoot up drugs, right, when you leave the hospital? I mean, some of the things we do are so insane to me.
I know.
I mean, just like we immediately chemicalize, the whole process of natural childbirth, instead of being like a toxic waste dump before you even get out of the hospital. And then we move into inflammation. Wow, big source. Our world today, we die of inflammatory diseases versus infectious diseases now. And then angiogenesis and blood circulation. So is your blood pressure too high? Is it too low? How do you oxygenate? How do you perfuse? Cancer cells love hypoxia, low oxygen environments. And then are you growing a lot of new blood vessels to go and heal that chronic wound of cancer that has stopped listening to all the other signals? That's the other one that goes into the bucket. Things like high copper from copper sulfate in our pesticides really raise our copper levels, which is a lovely way to fuel angiogenesis to tumors in the body. And then things like hormones. Oh my goodness, this is a big one. We're just steeped in a swimming pool of exogenous, xenoestrogen, toxic estrogens. You touch a plastic receipt, it goes right into your bloodstream. You drink out of a plastic bottle. You eat food that's been fed plastic enriched feed. what? You know, it's like these weird things that are around us all the time. And then, of course, we all get told that we're less feminine and less of ourselves at 30 years old, and we start getting pumped up with additional exogenous hormones to make us stay 30 into our 80s. That's a little new one on me. And then when we think about hormones, we think about thyroid and pineal gland, all the other endocrine hormones, including bone, which is a big endocrine hormone, and fat, adipose tissue, a big endocrine hormone. So the balance of those, and then into stress. And circadian rhythm pattern. And even you and I talking to each other through a screen right now, we're damaging our circadian rhythm through the blue screen. I know we got our little filter. Yes, we're good. Blessing it.
I do have a filter. I do have a filter on my screen.
Exactly. The filter there. I got my little blue filters in my glasses. But that's a big one. And then, of course, the mental emotional goes into the bucket. So that covers the 10 sort of additions to that mitochondrial bucket. And that's what I help people do. I help them look in the bucket, test, assess, and address what's in there, take out what doesn't belong, and populate or nourish what does.
That's awesome. That covers everything. And trust me, if you choose to consult with Dr. Nasha, she dives deep. I mean, I was just like kind of overwhelmed at the 25-page report that I received. But, you know, if you really are serious and you want to dive deep, she's awesome. Now, one of the things that I experimented with last year was the ketogenic diet. You know, I discovered the link between, you know, I finally started to understand that cancer is a metabolic disease, right? And that there were certain pathways that promoted cancer, and we could turn those pathways off or turn them down by watching our blood sugar levels and introducing more ketones and going to ketosis. So I really hardcore did the ketogenic diet. And along the way, I've discovered that there's kind of a misunderstanding where people think that a ketogenic diet is just lots of meat, you know, lots of, animal fats, and, but you can do it in a more plant-based, balanced way, which is, I believe, you're plant-based. And so tell us a little bit how one approaches a ketogenic diet in a plant-based format.
I love that. And right before the show, we were kind of talking about this a little bit, but, you know, the goal really, what gets popular and what sells books and what people latch onto and want to read are sort of headlines. So even though I've never considered myself the ketogenic practitioner, that's just what people have associated me with. What I am is a metabolic practitioner, and I will use whatever tools are necessary to bring someone back into metabolic balance. And I don't dogmatically say you have to eat this or not this. We test, assess, address. And we do things like we can actually put our metrics into food, like Chronometer or MyFitnessPal, and get a better sense of your day-to-day ratios. Because so many people think, I don't eat any sugar. And when you actually look at it, by the time they're done with their oatmeal and blueberry and banana breakfast, they've had 3 days of sugar by 10 a.m. You know, it's like, oh, goodness gracious. And that was our Heart Healthy ADA recommended diet. Mm-hmm. So those are just the big kind of changes in people's psychology. And you can get there by eating a very high fat, low carbohydrate, normocentric protein, okay, meaning just enough protein to meet your diet, your needs, basically. So it's not a high protein. In fact, that's opposite of what we want for somebody who's potentially cancering, very opposite. And so there's that. There's also just low carb, high fat eating. That's different. Then there's also just low carb eating. And then there's intermittent fasting. And then there's calorie restricted diets. And then there's narrow window eating diets. My point is that there's a lot of ways to metabolically upgrade your system. And you have to explore it within yourself. Some people might resonate more with a every other day intermittent fasting program. Some people, like myself, once I became metabolically flexible, I can finish my dinner at 6 and check my ketones in the morning, and I'm in low grade ketosis with not changing anything. Because when you're naturally metabolically flexible, that is how we should be. We should have enough ketones to get us through the night, right? That should happen in that place. But we all are so accustomed to snacking at bedtime or getting up in the middle of the night because we're hungry, or eating the second you get out of bed, stuffing something in your face. So I think that getting hung up on the diet is really detrimental to us moving the conversation forward in integrative oncology. The key to success is that ketones themselves do have unbelievable anti-cancer treatment and potential. We know the ketones themselves absolutely affect all 10 of the hallmarks of cancer. We know that. People like Dr. Adrienne Scheck and her research and others have actually shown, wow, this actually does turn off cell proliferation. This does, do HDAC inhibition. So it's an epigenetic modifier. It goes through the whole terrain 10, or excuse me, the whole hallmark 10 of cancer metabolism. And metabolism is only one of those 10. And you can still do a lot to enhance your conventional treatments, your non-conventional treatments, your overall health and well-being, definitely longevity, people like Dr. Walter Longo and his work, simply by fasting. And whether you are fasting off of your standard American diet, I don't recommend that, by the way, but there are still plenty of studies showing that even that is beneficial. I mean, the study out of MD Anderson for breast cancer was like, they didn't even ask what these ladies ate. They just wanted to make sure they didn't eat for 13 hours.
Right.
And they were able to cut their recurrence by 70%.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And the effects on chemotherapy when they fast for 24 to 48 hours, fewer side effects, more effectiveness, more die-off. So yeah, amazing. So
we put our attention versus keto versus vegan versus, it's like, oh, we're missing the point.
Food fight, right?
Yes,
I know.
that's so good.
No food fights. So question then, so we see different products that are ketogenic based, so they actually introduce ketones orally that you can take in different shakes or powders, or how do you feel about that in improving ketosis?
I love that question, because when they first hit the market, my first thought was, oh crap.
Right. Another thing.
Right, another thing. And I thought, here is the get out of jail free card. Everyone wants that easy fix. They're like, it's sort of like people who just go to church on Sunday and are jerks the rest of the week. It's that same thing. You can't quite do it that way. It's got to be this whole process of you changing and overhauling your whole terrain. However, what I have learned is that there is a time and a place. So for instance, no matter what people's diet is, so even if they're in ketosis or not in ketosis, we have found that if you take exogenous ketones, okay, 20, 30 minutes prior to hopping in a hyperbaric oxygen chamber, or 20 to 30 minutes before having hyperthermia or radiation, you will actually give yourself a nice little nutritional or therapeutic spike in ketones, which usually have anywhere from a 2 to 6 hour duration, depending on the person's chemistry. And that seems to enhance the effect of the treatment. So it acts almost like a Trojan horse while protecting the cells around it from being impacted negatively with the toxic treatment. So I think it has a place. Now, my patients who are more metabolically flexible and maybe are easy in and out of ketosis, maybe they just fast before they go to a chemo. If they add those therapies, then none of them ever need the side drugs with their chemo. They don't need the steroid. They don't need the anti-nausea meds. They don't need the anxiolytics or the antihistamines, because the fasting enough seems to quiet down that tumor lysis oxidative stress process to the healthy cells while really, frankly, blasting the cancer cells.
Wow, that's good to know. That's good to know. So do those exogenous ketones, can they improve your ketone levels if you take them?
They can. And so when I've had folks who have really tenacious metabolic, you look at their epigenetics, they've got the ACSL1 gene, they've got L-carnitine SNP genes like crazy. They've got metabolic SNP, and insulin resistance genes smattered all over. They've, third generation of diabetes, polycystic ovarian syndrome, obesity, it's pancreatic cancer, pancreatitis. I mean, it's bad, right? Like when you look at those, sometimes those folks are very challenging to get metabolically stable. These are the folks who are like, I'm in ketosis, but my glucose is still 113, or I'm in ketosis, but I feel awful. That is such a clue to me that their wiring is still very fried. And so I have found that the ketones can sort of smooth that transition while we work diligently to get them into that metabolic flexibility place that then they just thrive on.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. So let's, do you mind sharing a couple of your success stories with our audience? Anybody in particular that you can think of, or anything you'd like to share as far as just in general in your practice? What sort of, successes do you see, or transitions and changes that you see?
Well, one that's pretty recent was a young woman who BRCA mutation, huge family history of ovarian and breast cancer, was having pelvic pain, went in for her pelvic, went in and got a pelvic ultrasound that came back very concerning. They were 99.9% certain it was a mass on her ovary. Her CA-125 markers were off the charts, her HE4. I ran my typical terrain labs on her, and her trifecta, which is what I watch very closely, were all off the charts. She was starting to have some symptoms of sort of digestive upset, and a little bit of sort of ascites fluid was building up. We could see that on a CT scan when she followed up, that there was a questionable lesion on her liver. There was definitely fluid in her abdomen. This was a young woman. She was 24 years old. And we knew that she was like, I just want it out of my body. I just want to go into surgery, find out what I'm dealing with, and do treatment. So she didn't come to me alternatively. She came to me because she knew I had walked this path and she wanted good support around it. Well, we then spent the month, because she had just finished her menstrual cycle, and they couldn't get her in for a little bit for her surgery for like a couple days or weeks. And we know that if we can schedule some, and this is true for your community, especially in the breast cancer world, if we can schedule our surgeries when our estrogen levels are at their lowest. She was just on the peak. She was moving into ovulation again. So I knew this was not the time to schedule her surgery. We knew we basically had a month to get her ready for surgery. So I did everything I could to kind of sponge out as much estrogen as possible, do my sort of consult of things like modified citrus pectin, and really up her zinc and her C and her vitamin A and like all of her good, wound healing nutrients. Got her on a very, very low carbohydrate diet. She actually wasn't in ketosis, but she was super, super low carb and was doing some fasting. She actually fasted for the days before her surgery, which is important anyway, but she did that a little bit extended so she could go in super clean and not have to deal with all the pain meds. We got her set up. We actually did a consult with her doctors to make sure they had tramadol for her versus opiates after, because opiates definitely have been shown to increase proliferation and migration of cancer cells. We also knew to get her off of those, even the tramadol, as quickly as possible. So we kind of we had a month to prepare in a way that I didn't expect. And everyone was fully bracing, even a stage 4 diagnosis at this time, right? When they got in there, the doctors were shocked. They're like, there's nothing here. There's not a mass. There's not anything on the liver. There's nothing in the peritoneal cavity. Now, mind you, they still took everything. So they did the full tabos. They took her ovaries and her uterus and her omentum and a bunch of nodes for sampling. 0 cancer. With the and a month before, lit up like a Christmas tree with things going on. And after the surgery, all of her markers came down right away, just in that month. And it was like, none of us, because I definitely didn't. I just thought I was getting her ready for surgery. So that was a very recent experience. And now, of course, she's like, okay, let's go look inside my bucket. She was like, I don't need to do that again.
Right.
Really important example. And an example I think about that's really relevant to your clientele is how many patients, and this is, I could probably tell you 24 easily, of how many patients had cavitations or dental issues or root canals that were on the same side as their breast cancer diagnosis. And once we finally dealt with those, cavitations, amazingly, the tumor shrunk. Again, I fought that for my own health journey for a long time and kind of poo-pooed the idea of it until in 2010, when I finally had my root canal tooth that failed 3 times. And with testing things like Clifford tests to realize I was allergic to every implant substance, and just have left it blank, and it's actually been a world of good. But it was the first time that my markers moved into normal since my diagnosis in 1991.
Well, there
and
you
so
go.
I kind of do those examples, like these things, you don't ever think that this would be related.
Essential number 5 is to embrace biological dentistry. So here, you hear it again.
Yes. And over and over and over, I see these amazing stories. In fact, the woman I just left with right before I came up here has had an ongoing right-sided kind of oozing, icky, broken tooth for months and months and months and months. And she happens to have a fibroadenoma that's got dysplastic cells showing up. They coincided at the same time for her. And so today she saw our local biological dentist, who completely did some other tests and saw all kinds of things going on. He's like, this is really relevant. So I have no doubt that this young woman's going to be able to stabilize and turn around what's going on simply by addressing something that she just didn't think was significant. Like most of us, we never think this is connected. So I thought that was kind of a cool pearl to throw in. I know you promote it and you have a population that this really resonates with.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. So if there was one thing to choose from to lower your risk with cancer, what would that be?
The more I learn, the more I feel like I need to learn, number one. So I'm humbled by this experience every day. But in this moment on my spectrum of understanding and of healing, this could change next week, I think probably the most important thing that we could do for ourselves today is to restore our rhythm with nature and seasons, and have technology breaks, get outdoors. We spend less than 15 minutes outdoors and on average as Americans. That's insane. Know the cycle of the moon, know the cycle of the season, lay on the ground, walk on the beach, get those negative ions. These are the things that we take for granted, and they're free and they're available to all of us. And when we can see that 2 weeks of camping can reset somebody's circadian rhythm and upregulate their natural killer cells and absolutely just flood their body with other immunomodulators, you know, it's like maybe unplugging is the key. We're so plugged in now.
Yeah, I love that. I so agree with that. That's so true. That's why we moved to Florida. So
I
we can be outside longer.
Lucky girl, she's like so taking care of her circadian rhythm.
That's right. So if any of our audience is interested in learning more about you or even consulting with you, if they want to take a really deep dive, it's fair warning.
Thank you for that.
Get ready to roll up your sleeves. And in case you're hearing some noise,
you're getting a storm.
There's a big thunderstorm. It's summertime here, so every afternoon there's a big thunderstorm. So
awesome. You're getting some nice electrons right now around here.
Right. It's beautiful. Lots of rain coming down. So if our audience wanted to learn more about you, where would they go?
First of all, I think a good starting point is the book, The Metabolic Approach to Cancer, which I co-authored with my colleague, Jess Kelly. She's an amazing metabolic-centric nutritionist and worked with me for many, many years in my practice, as well as facilitating cancer retreats. And then the other place where you can find me, although I'm the founder of Optimal Terrain Consulting, we are morphing into a whole kind of new brand and program. And the best place to find me is www.terrain and the number 10.com. And then, of course, following me on social media on Facebook page, same name book. Optimal Terrain Consulting right now, which will also soon turn to Terrain 10, has a lot of information. I'm always trying to upload great data that supports this Terrain 10 concept and methodology, and always share your fantastic posts with all my viewers as well. And those are kind of the best ways to keep track of what's happening. There's so much, also what we were talking about before this, that's happening in the world of integrative oncology and really health in general is taking a different seat in the arena now that is very exciting to me. I actually think we might see health care on the horizon versus disease care. Yes,
it is exciting to see that. And, you know, thanks to doctors like you that are really taking the lead and showing us the science behind all of this. Because, you know, we used to think natural healing was just, you know, new age fluff. I started practicing in 1979. So it gives you an idea, you know, back then maybe it was new age fluff, but now, you know, it's so nice to see the science behind everything. So thank you so much for your time, Dr. Nasha. It's been amazing. And I love and appreciate all the work that you're doing. And hopefully we'll meet in person soon someday.
I hope so. Oh my gosh. Thank you, Dr. B. And the same, absolutely mutual.
Okay. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.